that we don't really prepare students to be career ready upon graduation. I also believe that when the students get out of college and they go in the work life, we really don't help them become really good leaders. Only those that are very fortunate to find some mentors, end up being good leaders also. Any of y'all share this same belief? Anybody? At least a few. My name is Zain Ali. I'm a professor at University of North Texas. I'm a clinical professor there. I started a new program. It was around experiential learning. And I also decided to start my PhD journey at the age of 54. It is torture. And every time I complained to my wife, she said, "You did it to yourself." And my dissertation study was basically around how do we help our students become career ready. And my PhD is in educational technology. And prior to coming to UNT, my experience was also in the industry. For 32 years, I've been in the industry. I was at companies like Accenture, Hackett Group, where I was doing consulting work. I was in a C-level executive at some companies. And I also started a company in 2009, which focuses on learning, education, consulting, and technology. So I tried to kind of put those together, and we actually built a really good team that has put a product together that we want to take to market. So with me today is Noreen, and Noreen is sitting over there. She flew all the way from Ireland to be at this conference. And so I'm just going to kind of talk about a little bit what we have done. I'll give you a background of why we have done what we have done. And I'm really looking for your support to see how could we make a difference if possible. So leadership is a rare commodity in my mind. And if you really look at, I did a Google search and I typed in books as to the word leadership, over 200,000 books showed up. I'm also in executive education. I do executive education at Southern Methodist University, SMU in Dallas. And I've also done that at UTD. And so universities are full of doing executive education and also business schools. There is a big line of students that want to take leadership programs. So we do all this, and in addition to all of that, research shows that $375 billion is spent on an annual basis to build leaders. So all that money is spent on building leaders, and what happens? The results are not very good. Personally, I was also doing executive education, and I basically did it in 3 different ways. When I started my executive education journey, I was doing leadership training. These used to be 1 or 2 day sessions. What do you think happened at those sessions? Any thoughts? Any thoughts from anybody what happens in a 2-day session? Nothing. Everybody has a great time, right? Everybody comes to those sessions from all over the globe. They have a great time, they network, they party in the evening, and if you talk to them 90 days later, this is not scientific, I can promise you they have forgotten 90% of what was discussed with them.
Pretty optimistic with 90 days. I would say 2 days.
Yeah, so probably 2 days. Since I didn't have any research numbers, I played it safe. I didn't like that model. So when some of my friends would call me and say, "Zain, I want you to do a 2-day training on communication or teamwork or leadership," I would say, "No, I'm not doing it." And they would say, "Why not?" I said, "Because you guys are going to forget everything. It's a waste of my time." And I started working with them to where I would work with them over a period of time, like over 3 months. Same 2 or 3 days, but let's do it over 2 or 3 months. Then I started doing the second program, which is a cohort program, where I would actually work with leaders and I would bring them together and I would say, "Okay, why don't we work together for a year or 9 months, and we'd meet once a month, and we are going to all learn from each other. And by the way, we will also take a project from your organization, and we are going to take that project and we're going to apply what we learn onto your project, and the learning was amazing. And then somebody told me, he said, Zain, why don't you do executive education? And I go, sure, that sounds like times a week by doing executive education. But it's very limited. You can only make a difference with a few leaders at a time. You cannot do a lot of leaders at the same time. And then most of the leadership programs, they basically use two tools. And I use the same two tools. One of the tools most of the leadership programs use is a personality profile. Whether it is DISC, whether it's Myers-Briggs, or it is social styles. Probably those three would cover about 90% of all the personality profiles. Probably. I don't know that for a fact, but those are the three that are most common. They would also use a 360 assessment tool. And I don't have any pictures to show 360 assessment, but are you all familiar with the 360 assessment? You know, when I say that, do you all know what I mean? Okay, so I see a lot of heading notes, but I'll just touch base on 1 second. A 360 assessment is a tool where you actually define different raters, like your manager, your peers, your direct reports, others, customers, whoever they might be, and you provide them with an assessment, you take the self-assessment, everybody else gives their rating on the same assessment, and you basically see where you stand and how do others see where you stand. So I was using the same tool, and research shows that about 78 to 93% of the organizations do use one or both of those tools, definitely both when they're doing leadership development. Still, after spending all this money, after doing all these tools, we see these challenges. According to the DDI research, 35% of the executives promoted internally and 47% of the executives hired externally are considered failures at the director, VP, or CXO level. So that's a very huge number, especially if you look at it as to what the effort it goes into hiring people. 90% of the Fortune 500 companies use a 360 assessment, but the results are very modest. The third challenge is that the cost of implementing 360 assessments is very high. It's not just the tool cost, which when I was using it, used to be anywhere between $250 to $350 per assessment, but it's also the cost of the executive coach. So when you combine the two, it becomes a high cost. But if you don't use an executive coach, you do not get good results. I mean, that's what the research says also. So the role of the executive coach is very important. This is from a model from Bracken, and he basically says that he says various things. I've summarized 3 of them. The biggest thing in a 360 assessment is awareness. The leader, when they take a 360 assessment and they get unbiased feedback about what their leadership competencies are, they basically become aware of where do they want to improve. That's one of the biggest things. The second thing is the acceptance and then making it accountable. But in order to be successful, the assessments have to be tailored to the needs of the organization. They have to match with the goals and values of the organization. And then also, it should lead to some personalized goals as to what does the leader need to do different. And then the last thing is, it should be measured again, maybe after a certain period of time to see if the change, if the assessment and the intervention, did it actually make a change or it didn't make a change. So that is from Bracken. And through various research, there has been 12 conditions. Those conditions I've listed at the bottom, but the research would never talk about how those conditions should be applied. So we actually took those conditions and we broke it into 5 phases. In the planning phase, you have to make sure that the assessments is aligned to the goals and values of the organization. Same in the planning phase, the roles have to be different. You cannot use a generic assessment for everybody. The needs of a technology leader might be very different than the needs of a marketing leader. Some of the qualities might be same, some of the needs might be different. You need to make sure that that's incorporated. And you have to make sure that there is good communication. So everybody knows that the purpose of using this assessment or this tool is for development. It is not to punish you. So those three things should be done very well in the planning phase. The feedback has to be unbiased. You have to have multiple users in different rater categories, and it has to have both quantitative as well as qualitative data that needs to be collected. In the data analysis phase, it needs to create self-awareness. People should be held accountable for what they are trying to do, and it should be matched with their personality profile. This today, for most of the assessments that I have used, is always a paper-based document. In the goal setting, you basically pick up the competency that you want to do. You need to have some incentives as to why people should improve. And in the last phase, in the goal execution, there should be some mentoring. This is what research says. And there should be a second assessment. And whenever these two are missing, usually the results are not very good. So I'm going to keep on moving. Our vision for an AI-based assessment is that we want to be able to bring in 3 feedbacks. Number 1, it should have a multi-rater feedback. Number 2, and the multi-rater feedback, should be able to be, number 2, it should be customized. So it should be customized to the goals and values of the organization. Number 3, we need to be able to bring in a personality profile. So those are the 3 inputs that we basically looking for. Second is when you go into the scenario, you need to have, in the data analysis phase, the leader or the person that you're using the assessment for should be able to do the what-if analysis on themselves. They do not need a report. They should be able to look at everything online, should be able to create the self-awareness themselves, and there should be chatbots that are making the recommendations. Are you sure you did this? Or are you sure you did not do that? So it's like an interactive with the user and machine interface versus looking at a report or needing someone to talk to you with a report. The third thing that we talk about is personal preferences. So as we collect the data, we not only do these 3 things, we also want to know how you actually learn. Do you learn by reading? Do you learn by watching videos? How do you actually learn? We are curious to know about that too. And then the system should also be able to leverage the MOOCs. Is everybody familiar with MOOCs over here? Right? So massively open online courses. And there is zillions of those. And they are really, really good. I mean, I have used them for my own PhD as well as for my own learning. They are really good. The challenge is finding the right MOOC, finding the right content on the right MOOC, right? I mean, that's the biggest challenge that at least I see. So, but we should be able to set goals, and MOOCs should be used to help address those goals. Then the next is to execute the goals. As we go into execute the core, we see the role of a coach as a facilitator. Not one-on-one coaching, but how can I coach a community? How can I be a facilitator? And there should be opportunities for peer-to-peer learning. And we actually started the project as peer-to-peer learning. And then as we did our pilots, pilot is like a test. As we did our test, we basically got feedback. They said, no, we actually want not only just peers in the group, we actually want managers and directors. So we want learning to come from everywhere. And I said, that's a great idea. So we made that change. And then at the end, we should be able to have a comparative analysis, and there should be recommendations as to what you should do next. So this is the journey that we started on 1 year ago. And I'm very, very blessed to have an amazing team. And Noreen is sitting over here. She designed the user experience. But we also have Omer that are developers. We have Talha that is a front end. We have Mariam that does the marketing. All of these folks are like amazing, and they do a really, really good job. Summer that makes sure that he takes care of all the clients. So they all do a really good job, plus their leadership teams also. So thanks to them, we have been able to create something that started out as my dissertation in a PhD program, and we have actually built an application that has 5 modules. And our objective really is to transform the way leadership is done or students get career ready. So that's the journey that we are on. We have built it on the learning principles of constructivism and connectivism. And constructivism learning theory basically emphasizes on that the learner is in control of their own journey. So, you basically empower the learner to learn, and connectivism, basically learning theory, focuses on how you basically learn by connecting with everybody. So basic principles is what we are keeping at that. And these are the 5 modules. The first module that we have is basically where we customize the assessment. So you can actually use any of the standard assessments that we provide. You can modify the standard assessment that we provide, or you can actually build your own assessment. And when you build your own assessment, you can basically make it a self-assessment, or you can make it a multi-rater assessment, and you have no limits on how many rater categories that you choose. The second module that I have is we basically automate the program management process. So once the assessment has been selected, the user actually is in charge of their journey to where they say basically use the standard assessment, or they can pick their own raters. They can actually work with the mentee or a manager, and they can actually work with them to be able to do that. So everything from assessment selection to all the collection of identification of raters is done through this module, the second module, which is the program. The third module that we have is an analytics. We do not have a manual report, period. We basically said we are not going to do a manual report. What we are going to do is provide online analytics. So within the analytics module, we have multiple sub-modules underneath that, where we have the radar chart, we have the ranking of the competencies. You can look at all the questions. You can look at trend analysis as to which rater category rated you which way. But the objective is to where you can actually create the self-awareness. In the next phase, what we do is we basically do personal development planning. So in the personal development planning, we basically allow the user to be able to pick their own competency that they want to develop. And once they have developed their competency, they actually get content that is sent to them based upon all the input that we have collected. Now the coach, if they're working with the coach can actually recommend things that they should do, or they can go through the library and pick anything that is sent to them, or they can find things on their own and make it edit into the library of things that they want to do. And then the last thing that we do, the last module that we have, is what we call connected, in a connected manner. So in a community, the coach or the manager can go in and they can create a community of all the folks that are in that program, or they can actually connect all the folks that are in multiple programs together, and they can learn together. The community can be a private community to where only those folks that are invited can join, or it can be a public community to where it's open to all the users that are in the database, and if anybody wanted to join them, they could join that community also. So that's what we have done. Some of the integration around MOOCs and stuff we haven't done yet, but that's like then the next phase of the program. Are we using it? Yes, in a limited manner. So we have used it with about 300 students at the University of North Texas. These are mostly my students or other professors, and they have basically used the career readiness assessment. And career readiness assessment basically comes from, I think the next slide is that the career readiness assessment actually comes from National Association of Colleges and Employers, NACE. So they basically have done a lot of research as to what are the 8 competencies that employers want. And these are the competencies, and they actually define what are all the questions that go under these competencies that employers want. So we basically took that research. It's a NACE instrument that we use for career readiness. And then we have actually built 4 different assessments, all the way from a high potential, a manager to a leader which it might be a director, VP level, to an executive. And we basically provide those as templates also. So you can use any of the assessments that are there. And we are running it with 2 different companies right now. And the last thing that I would like to say is that we really are on a journey to figure out a way to democratize this process. And the pricing, we are still struggling with what should the pricing be. But right now we have put it at $149 for 2 assessments. So you basically get an assessment at the beginning, and then you can pick your second assessment anywhere after certain months to do that. If you are an educational institution or you do anything with education, we basically have priced it at $39. And that also, again, uses 2 assessments for the students, once in the beginning and once later down in the journey. And I really don't want to be hung up on the pricing. If any of y'all are interested in partnering with us, we would welcome that opportunity. And I am down to 40 seconds, so I'm going to stop, and I'll take any questions that you might have.
Thank you so much for this presentation. And I guess as a data science student, I think like one thing that I want to ask is, maybe you haven't thought about this, but to build any AI model, you're going to be feeding in data to be able to build that. How are you thinking about like tackling the bias that exists in this data itself? Because yes, we're getting rid of manual reports to get rid of bias, but how are we going to tackle the bias that exists with like just data in general?
I don't know the answer to that yet. So we know that we have put all the different pieces in place to be able to collect all the data that we need to do. The next step in our journey is we are experimenting with the patterns, and we haven't done that yet. So our target size that we have is pretty small right now, but we are basically trying to learn as to what the data is telling us today. So based upon the learning that we have, I honestly do not have an answer, but that's a great question. Thank you for asking that. Any other questions?
In terms of learning, I mean, assessment is not just a means to an end, but the process of assessment itself is really interesting. And you learn while you're being assessed. And so I'm wondering, in terms of social learning, how much is involved in that, in the apps and in the AI you're using? How much is there community-based learning and peer learning included in your invention of these assessments and the 360, as well as in the price and all of that?
So the community learning, we are using it with one program right now, and it's with students. And based upon the feedback that we took what we learned in the classroom and we just put it online, right? So the way I teach is all experiential learning, where I actually have the role of a facilitator. And the students actually learn from each other much more than they learn from me. And we have now taken that process and we have put online. We are using it with one student group today. I wouldn't say that the results are any different than what we are seeing online that we are seeing over there. The one thing that I would say is that for these students, when they're in the classroom, I can see the learning much better. When they're online, their interaction volume is much lower. So that's what we know today on the learning community. Any other question?
Yes. Hi, doctor. How are you?
Good.
I'm really inspired by the fact that you went back and studied your PhD at 54. That's amazing. Thank you for sharing that. That's really inspirational. Deanna Hearn here. I'm super curious, so I'm going to have questions probably in every session. But my question is I love the fact that you have a package for students. I think building and developing leadership while they're in school is amazing, and having that 360 available for them is great. I know what that looks like for me, having recently done one with my team, but what would that look like for a student? Is it their peers, after-school groups they're involved in that are going to be, taking that assessment on their leadership? Like, what does that look like?
So, you know, my experience is in higher education. My experience, I don't have any experience in less than, you know, higher education. So K-12, I don't have that experience. But if people with experience would be interested in building an assessment that would meet the needs of that target audience, I do believe that it does carry over in all aspects of their life.
Mike. I'm interested. I own a learning center, Miracle Math Coaching, brain-based learning center, and we're doing cutting-edge stuff, and I'm definitely interested in talking with you.
I will come and hunt you down.
All right, let's do it.
Any other questions? Thank you very much for your time.